Hello.
Hi, good afternoon and welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Hi, everybody, welcome. I'm just putting some things in the chat. If you wish to keep up with some updates and training, any new initiatives that are happening across the Emirates, please do follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram. And I've put my email address up as well. If any of you want to be added to our mailing list, I send out an email every fortnight. And I host these forums every 2 weeks. We usually get a range of experts in. It's all free, all open. Anyone who wants to join, you're all welcome. We have lots of different people joining us, delivering on lots of different areas of inclusion and well-being. So everybody is welcome. I'm just waiting for my co-host, Susie Hache, who is lead counsellor at GEMS, and she'll be joining us probably in the next minute or two. For anybody who doesn't know me, my name is Catherine O'Farrell. I am a counsellor, psychotherapist. I'm a consultant in education, and my speciality is in inclusion. I'm a group head for Bloom Education. I had previously been a group head with Athena Education, managing inclusion across the Emirates. So I've been working in the Emirates for about 9 years now. I'm certainly not an expert. I'm learning every day. So if anybody has any comments or any advice or anything you'd like to share, this is an open forum. Please do feel free to do so. And everybody is welcome. Hi, does somebody have a question? Blessy, you have a question? See your hand up. No, if anyone has any questions or anything, feel free to ask before we get going. I'm going to wait until about 4:03 until our co-host joins. and then we'll get going with the presentation. Can you guys see my screen? Yeah, super. Thank you, Joe. Awesome. Hi everyone. Crikey guys, we've got 100 participants already. This is brilliant. Everyone is very welcome. I hope everyone is looking forward to their Eid break. I know schools in Abu Dhabi have broken up today, most of them, and I'm guessing Dubai schools, anybody from our Dubai schools, are you breaking up today? Yeah, super. It should be a nice break, and it's been quite cool for the last few days, so hopefully we'll have good weather for it. That would be great. And I've posted our Instagram and LinkedIn accounts for the Inclusion Network ME, which is the account that I'm hosting for sharing information about inclusion across the Emirates. So if KHDA, SPIA or ADEC are adding updates, I try to get them up there as soon as possible, and kind of any new research or anything that's happening, try to get it up and share it out across the community. Guys, if you know of any inclusion practitioners, whether they're shadow teachers, inclusion leads, anybody working in counseling, psychotherapy, who you think would benefit from these kind of sessions, please do share with your network, and let's get the word out. Okay, I'm going to get going. Let me just get my presentation in order. Okay. Right, guys, so today's session is all about supporting our students of determination in schools. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat. If anyone has any questions, please do post on the chat, or indeed you can just call out and ask as we go. I don't mind being interrupted at all. So for those of you who have just joined, my name is Catherine O'Farrell. I am a group head for Bloom Education. I have a consultancy where I do school improvement for inclusion, and generally a counsellor and psychotherapist as well. So I've been working across the Emirates for a number of years and gathered, I hope, quite a bit of information about supporting students with individual needs. So just a little note on forum decorum. I would ask that all mics be muted to ensure that speakers can be heard. If you have a question, either write it in the chat, or as I said, you can just call out if you wish. Please listen to the presentation first and add a comment in the chat so that we can address them at the end. But if you have a question, I don't mind. We keep the sessions focused on students and practice, so we don't discuss individual conditions in schools or individual cases generally, unless you have a really pertinent case that we can discuss anonymously. Industry experts are always welcome. So if you're coming from a private practice or you have an educational tool that you want to chat about, that's okay. But we don't do sponsorship, and we don't sell anything on the forum. I am recording the session, which I will share in our group email, probably tomorrow or the day after. So Please be mindful of that. And remember that all the presenters, we're in the same role as you guys. Nobody is a unique expert. Everybody can learn from each other. So if you have something interesting that you want to share, please feel free to do so. Okay, so today's session, we're going to look in detail at what exactly is the role of a shadow teacher or a teaching assistant, and what benefits should a student get from really good quality support. What are the things we should see? Characteristics of good shadow teaching or being of a teaching assistant, some tips for good practice, and how can I support my student if they've got really challenging behavior. So there are two main roles. Let me just switch this onto the slideshow, my apologies. Okay, all right. There are two main roles for a shadow or a teaching assistant. And these are supporting the children's learning and supporting the main class teacher. So shadowing a student requires that we understand how a child's age and grade level can influence what their expected learning and capacity can be. So it's important that you know what the general expectation for typically functioning students are at whatever age that you're working with, but also to be mindful of the specific individual needs of the student who you're working with. So if you have a student with, say, moderate to profound autism, what are the general expectations for a child of that age? If you have a student who has moderate to profound dyslexia, what are the expectations for that age too? It's important also to understand the student's background, their social and emotional development, and how all of these different things interact with the student's academic expectation. So it's a really quite a complex thing to be a shadow teacher or a classroom assistant, because each child is quite complex. Another really important part is to understand the teacher under whom you're working. Very often I have shadow teachers approaching me to say that their class teacher is really hard to work with, or they're struggling with the leadership team in their school. And it's important to understand how the leadership team in your school work, what their expectations are, what their desired goals are, and to build a really good rapport with your class teacher. And that should be separate to whether you like them or not, or whether you get on as friends or not. That has to be bespoke. It has to be something that you kind of bridge over and build a relationship that you can work through with the class teacher. Oftentimes the teacher's character and educational philosophy are really important components. So you would try to match with a class teacher who is similar to you. The key ingredients for successful shadow teaching are patience and cooperation, collaboration and open communication channels between members of the child support system, and that's key to achieving the child's targets. So understanding how to communicate with your class teacher and how they work best. So what's in it for students to have a really good, strong shadow teacher? So the student should follow regular class instruction and interaction with their peers. So if you've got a student with moderate to profound special needs who might normally be excluded from mainstream education, having a shadow teacher or a good quality classroom assistant can help that child to access mainstream education where they may otherwise have been segregated. And that's really important. You can change a child's life by helping them to access mainstream. all of the research shows that when a child is in mainstream education, they develop and blossom in a much more efficient and progressive way, as opposed to being in a specialized center or being in a special class. So it's the role of a shadow teacher is really important. The student learns to build on his or her strengths and not their weaknesses.
Wala ka signal.
Hi, can I ask everyone to mute their mics, please? Please. Sorry, guys. Okay, so yeah, we're building on their strengths as opposed to their weaknesses. Very often when students are in separate classes, they're surrounded by students who have similar or challenging needs, and this can compound barriers to learning. Whereas when they're in mainstream, they are surrounded by children who are typically functioning where the expectation is usually high, and this helps our students to blossom. And of course, the student receives educational enrichment. So they get to access mainstream education and to learn with typically functioning students. So what are the characteristics of a good shadow teacher or a good teaching assistant? And one of the top ones for all practice, whether you're a class teacher, as a leader like I am, or say a principal or a psychologist, whoever you are, the most important thing is to understand your students, to get to know each one individually, to get to know their strengths and their weaknesses, the areas that they can thrive in and the areas that they need to develop. That's got to be number one all the time. A really important function of being a good shadow teacher or teaching assistant is the ability to communicate with your mainstream class teacher. So talking to the teacher all the time. Don't be afraid to ask your class teacher questions. So often I meet classroom assistants or shadow teachers who are really reluctant to approach their class teachers. It's like almost a barrier of, oh, I can't ask them that, I look silly. There's no such thing as a silly question when you're supporting kids, especially children with special needs. If you're not sure about something or you feel like something needs to be addressed, talk to your class teacher. If you feel like your class teacher isn't supporting you properly, then talk to another teacher or talk to your grade group leader. It's really important to feel that ability to ask people or to talk to people. It would be very unusual for a school to reprimand a shadow teacher or a classroom assistant who speaks up. If you have something that's challenging you, you've got to speak up and be brave about it. A key is the ability to ask questions and to try to find out as much as you can. If you get a new student into your class with, say, a need that you haven't come across before, like dysgraphia or dyscalculia, maybe something like cerebral palsy, and you've never worked with this kind of kid before, you've got to ask questions. Ask the class teacher. The class teacher mightn't know. Ask the head of inclusion, ask a SEND teacher, ask as many people as you can. Have you ever worked with a child with this kind of need? What has worked for you and how have you managed? Another key characteristic is to be flexible. When you're in a classroom, everybody really needs to be flexible. You might be supporting a child in toilet training one day. You might be supporting a child in learning how to write another day. You might be supporting the teacher in creating a classroom environment, like doing displays or making resources another day. So you've got to be really flexible in the way that you work and the expectations that you work. And it's the same for a class teacher. I was a class teacher for maybe 12 or 13 years, from early years through to K to 12. And like every day was different. You could be literally creating a display on a Monday and then teaching a class of 40 kids on a Tuesday. So you've got to be really flexible. The ability to manage groups of students with challenging behaviours. We often see that the classroom assistant and the shadow teacher are really vital people in helping the class teacher to manage groups of students. So usually in class, you'll split your class up into different abilities of groups. And the shadow teacher and teaching assistant are vital in supporting certain groups. So if you're asked to do that, it's important that you know how to manage different types of behaviours. So talk to the class teacher for tips and talk to the inclusion department for tips. How can I manage a child who is always shouting out? Or how can I motivate a child who just doesn't want to participate? And Google it as well. You'll find lots of things online. I always think that a really strong characteristic of a quality teacher, whether you're a shadow teacher or a teaching assistant, is to have humor. Kids really respond well to humor and laughter and joy and energy. And these two components make your life so much easier. It can be really stressful in a classroom. So if you can have a laugh and enjoy what you're doing and have fun, it will make your days pass a lot more quickly and easily. So here are some tips for good practice that I've seen in the classrooms that I've observed over the years. Again, I always go back. The number one is to know your student, to understand them really well, and to know what makes your student tick. A really good practice is to ask your class teacher for your student's IEP. That's your individual education plan. So when you get the IEP, you can see on there exactly what the student's area of need is. You can see what targets they're working on from the whole team, from their inclusion team, your class teacher, and the parents. They should all be involved, and the student. They should all be involved in writing the IEP. And you can see what the students' needs are. So are they autistic? Are they ADHD? Do they have difficulty with writing? Do they have difficulty following instruction? So getting and reading and knowing your student's IEP is really important. And you should have that with you kind of all the time so that you can track what you're doing with your student. Where possible, reach out to the student's parents and ask them what works for your child at home. Now, do this through your class teacher or through your inclusion team, but a shadow teacher definitely 100% should be in close contact with the family. A classroom assistant to a lesser extent probably because you're working with more kids. But it's so handy to speak to the parents of these kids and get their perspective. They might have some really useful tips for you that you can use in school, something that works at home, like sometimes really simple information like Ahmed loves green tractors. If you know that, you can use that information when you're trying to motivate him to do maybe math or to do PE or something. Those kind of little bits of information that are bespoke to the student, to the individual child, can really, really help. If you don't know about a condition that the child that you're working with has, then Google it. If you found that you've asked the class teacher and they haven't really given you enough information, or you've asked the inclusion team and you're a little bit embarrassed to ask about more, Google it. So if you have something complex, like cerebral palsy, it's quite complex, or even dyslexia, if you Google it, you'll find loads of information about what causes it, how it looks like in the brain, what it does to the child's ability to function. Like, for example, dyslexia, it's not just a condition that affects a student's reading and writing. It also affects their ability to organize things. So you might find that the child with dyslexia, they always forget their pencil case. They always forget their water bottle. They're always disorganized or forgetting homework. And that could be because of dyslexia. So if you find out all about their condition, you'll understand their behaviors a lot better. Talk to your main class teacher at the start of every week and find out what is the class learning about this week. So asking them for the weekly planning so that you can look forward and see, okay, this week we're going to do floating and sinking in science. What do I need to know about it? And equally, what does my student need to know about it? Is there anything I can do to prepare them for learning? Is there any vocabulary I need to know? And that can really help you be prepared for the week ahead. If there are topics you don't understand on the weekly plan, ask the class teacher. So for example, very often I go into classes to observe doing school development, and the teacher might be teaching something complex in maths, for example, like a lot of the advanced calculus and all of that kind of stuff. I have no idea what it's about. So I can't really tell if the students are understanding it or if they're making progress in some classes. So I have to ask the class teacher, what were the students learning about in this lesson? So if you don't understand something that's on the weekly planning, there's no way you'll be able to teach your student what's on the plan for that session. There's no way you'll be able to support them if they have questions. So it's really important that you ask the class teacher, okay, this week we're studying, let's say, molecular biology. There's something about protons and all of that kind of stuff. If you don't understand, ask the class teacher, well, can you give me a really simplified explanation of this topic so that I can tell my student what it's about as well? And again, there are no silly questions. It's much more silly per se not to ask and to not understand something than it is to ask and to get a better understanding so you can support your student. Now, when you are operating within a classroom, there are different types of practice to make your learning environment as good as it possibly can be. So there's general optimization, which means optimizing, making something the best it can be, optimizing for general practice. And then you've also got specific lesson optimization, which we'll come to next. So for general optimization, you're optimizing the environment. You're making it as good or as accessible as possible for the students who you're working with. So you need to think about, does your student need any special physical accommodations? Do they need to be in a certain position in the class? Very often, kids who have individual needs are best positioned toward the front. Now, there are some exceptions, like some students prefer to sit at the back. It depends on the student, but usually it's better to have a student with special needs toward the front so that they can access the teacher directly. It also helps keep them directly in mind of the class teacher. It can also help them to be kind of close to whatever resources they need as well. There may be some specific physical environmental needs, like if your child has a physical disability or they're in a wheelchair, you need to make sure that every classroom environment that they go to is ready for them. Your child might need some assistive technology if they have hearing aids, if they need to use some visual aids, or they have touch typing. You need to make sure that all of that is in place. Things like wobble cushions, I'm sitting on a wobble cushion myself at the moment, or fidget tools. Whatever they need, you need to make sure they're ready for them. If your child has special tools that they use, like a special pencil grip or the slant boards that they use for writing, again, assistive technology. Some children are using TheraBands. It's important to have all of those ready. If there are instructional accommodations, such as if the teacher is making a presentation and you know your child has a visual impairment, the teacher might forget to enlarge the text. So you can remind the teacher. Some kids need text to speech, lined paper. It's important that as a shadow teacher or a classroom assistant, you know exactly what the child needs and that you can have all of those resources ready. So things like the pencil grip or TheraBands, or if the text needs to be bigger. And it's important to facilitate the relationships between your student and their peers and between your student and the class teacher. So if your student is struggling to talk to their peers or to engage with their friends, you can make a situation where they might be more comfortable in doing that. Maybe give them a job to do or set them as a leader in an activity so that they have the opportunity for that. And equally, if your student is maybe shy to ask the teacher some questions, you could help them and encourage them and build a relationship between your student and the class teacher. Now, the next area is to optimize the specific lesson that you're in. So asking the teacher for the weekly plan, again, so that you know exactly what's coming up. Find out each lesson and make sure you know what the content is. Make sure you understand the concepts. So when you see the teacher putting their learning objective on the board, that you know what's coming and you understand what the teacher expects of the students so that you can help your student understand the expectation that they have, and help the student understand, what do I need to do to be successful in this lesson? And sometimes we have to learn the content ourselves, and there's no embarrassment in that. We can't all know everything. It's okay to ask. It's very important to remind the class teacher to put in all of the accommodations for your student. So if your student needs closed captions on YouTube videos, that's where they put the subtitles on the YouTube videos. If your child needs a special apron or they need special tools, if the class teacher forgets, which we do often, we've so much going on with maybe 20 or 30 kids, sometimes the class teacher will forget. It's in your part of your job as a shadow teacher or a classroom assistant is to remind them and say, oh, miss, you forgot to do this, or oh, miss, sir, could just put on the closed captions. And most teachers will be really grateful for that, because it means you've got two adults supporting your kids as opposed to just one trying to remember everything. And don't be shy to do that. And make sure you arrange special accommodations. So for science lessons, if they need special clothing or tools, or if they're measuring, if they need large rulers and things like that. So you've got to make sure that all of the things they need are in place. Now, a really important thing for working with students with individual needs is to make sure that you challenge them. So many teachers will take a student with special needs and think, okay, this means they can't do this, this, and this. The vast majority of special needs affect one area of practice. So if your child has dyscalculia, it will affect their mathematical reasoning, but it won't affect their ability to think strategically. It won't affect their ability in English. It won't affect their ability in science. Well, it may do depending on certain bits, but usually it won't. They should be perfectly able to function as well as any other child in all of those areas. If you have a child with autism, very often autism is it's called comorbid. So you'll have maybe giftedness in one area. So sometimes you could have an autistic child who can't communicate very well, but who might be a gifted reader or a gifted mathematician. So it's really important that no matter what your child's area of need is, the student, that you really challenge them and push them. Don't think that having a special need will make them less able in all areas. Absolutely not. Usually, these kids are highly able in specific pockets. So it's important to really push them wherever you can and make sure that they're going to reach their full potential. It's really important to ask kids with special needs higher order questions. So many classes they go back to really simplified learning. The objectives are reduced, expectations are reduced, and very often we see kids with special needs, they're asked yes and no questions all the time. That's it. There's no reason for this. We should be asking these kids open-ended questions like, what makes you think? Or why do you think that mom did this in the story? Or where would you go if you were in this character's position? Asking really big questions to make them think and process. This develops language, it develops critical thinking, and it challenges them. Just in general, it will challenge them. It's really important to set individual goals and challenges, and that's where your IEP comes into play. By having the IEP with you all the time, you know what your students' goals are for that term, and you can work toward those individually with your student all the time. And if your student doesn't understand something, as a shadow teacher or a classroom assistant, you're going to see that possibly before the teacher will. So it's important to notify the teacher, call their attention and say, Miss, I don't think we fully get that. Could you explain it in another way or something like that? But calling the class teacher's attention if your student doesn't understand. When you're working individually with a child or with a small group, it's really important to build independence. Step back from the child. As shadow teachers particularly, we often see that there's this pressure to always look like you're busy and involved with the child. And I often see shadow teachers will, especially during observations, they'll be leaning right in with the child and they'll be almost guiding their hands. That should never happen, guys. We need to step back, help the children to be independent. As a shadow teacher, a really good indicator of a successful shadow teacher is that the child can work independently. If they don't need you all the time, that means you're doing your job really well because you're building their skills to work independently. So don't be afraid to step back. It's really good practice to spend your time with different students. So even if you're allocated to one student as an individual shadow teacher, it's important that you take time away from that student throughout the day, work with other groups, and talk to the class teacher about doing that. Ask the class teacher, is it okay if I let this child be on their own for this lesson so that they can build independence, so that they don't rely on you too heavily? Because some kids, they really do rely on you heavily. Working with different groups also gives you variety. So if you're a shadow teacher or a classroom assistant, that you're working with the more able children as well, you might be doing different activities. Whatever you're doing in the classroom generally will be supporting your student because you'll be supporting all students. But try not to stick to the one student or the one little group all day. And always reward, encourage, and support the whole class altogether. Now, it's really important to talk to your student, to the children who you're working with. So as a shadow teacher or a classroom assistant, take a little time and talk to the child one-to-one. Ask them, what do you like about school? What do you like at home? What are your favorite hobbies? What are your favorite things to do? And ask them in each lesson, what do you want to achieve from this lesson? And that one question can really help a child to focus. And I'm talking as young as 2- and 3-year-olds, KG, EYFS, early years, all the way up to 18-year-olds. Ask the student, what do you want to learn? So you have your weekly plan, and session 2 of the day is on, let's say, counting to 10. If you say to your student, why do we need to count to 10? What do you want to learn from this lesson? Or how will you use this knowledge? Getting them to think, okay, I can count to 10 so that I can tell my age, or I can pick 10 sweets at the shop. Simple things like that. Ask them as well all the time. Ask your student, what could be better, or what would you change? By asking them, they'll tell you. Give them the opportunity to tell you what's working well for them, or perhaps what's not working so well. This helps them to engage with you, and it builds your relationship, and it's just so important. It's such an important tool to use. Now, if you've got a student with really challenging behavior, they might be lashing out, they're not engaging, they might be fighting with their peers or the class teacher, how can we help to support them? So again, get to know your student. Take their concerns seriously. Ask them, what made you hit your friend? What made you push the chair over? What do you think was going on? Now, it's difficult to ask a student, why did you hit your friend? Even as an adult, it's hard for us to say why we do something. But if you reframe that question and say, what were you thinking about when you hit Mary? Or what was happening around you when you hit Mary? So it reframes the question, and it gets the student to think, not just, why did you do it? That was a bad thing to do. Rather, well, what was going on and what might have made me do that? And when you get those reasoning underneath the behavior, rather than just what you see, when you dig down and find out what triggered it, then you can start to address the triggers. A really good tool that I use for challenging behavior is the STAR method. So it's whenever you see a student who is doing the same kind of behaviors over and over, I think of STAR. So it's stimulus, which trigger, action, and reaction. So stimulus is, what was the thing that kind of pushed the start button on that behavior? The trigger, what actually made them do whatever they did. So say, for example, you have Ahmed pushed Mary. So the stimulus might have been that Ahmed woke up on the wrong side of the bed. He didn't eat breakfast. He had a fight with his brother on the way to school. He forgot his homework. He was just having a bad day. This was the stimulus. Then when he was in school, Mary took his pencil. That's the trigger. So that's the thing that really made him do the action. So then he pushes Mary. So that's the action. He pushed somebody. And then the reaction. How did he respond after that? Did he talk about it? Was he able to stop himself? Did he have a full meltdown? And if you can take the stimulus, trigger, action, and reaction over and over, you'll find patterns, and you might be able to address the patterns and stop the behaviors. So for example, if Ahmed is having fights with his brother every day in the car, and this is making him have these actions every day at school, perhaps you can find that out and then talk to mum and dad and have them sit separately. So maybe his brother could sit in the front and he'd sit in the back. And it could be something as simple as that might help stop the behavior. So understanding the student's behavior and their purposes for the behavior is really important. If a student has serious concerns, like if a student is constantly complaining that something is wrong, it's important to listen to them and to let them have a voice and to value what they're saying. And then take whatever it is that they're concerned about, talk to the parents, talk to the class teacher, even talk to their friends, and try to understand how you can all work together to move forward. Part of that moving forward is to set out a really clear path. So with your student, with the class teacher, possibly with friends or with their parents, set out a plan that has realistic goals. What can I do to be better at X, Y, and Z? Or how can my daily life in school be better? And you as a shadow teacher or a classroom assistant can facilitate that with your student. Identify both short and long-term goals so that you've got, I want to achieve this by the end of the year, but to get there on that path, I need to take this little step. step by step. So you as a shadow teacher and a classroom assistant, you can help to facilitate those little steps with your class teacher and accommodate each step on the way. So if you know that your student is really working hard on sharing, then you can facilitate that by giving them loads of stuff that they can share with other kids, or demonstrating sharing so that you share in front of them all the time and they can see you doing it. And again, at all times, challenge your student and push them, asking them questions and giving them little tasks and challenges that they can do. So that's pretty much it for our presentation today. Just about 45 minutes. I hope I didn't go on too long. I'm going to end the presentation now. If anyone has any questions, you can email me on Kate's Counselling or go to my website at KateCC. I'm just going to open up the chat now and see if there are any questions. I've got loads of WhatsApps, but okay, does anyone have any questions for me, guys? Please feel free to ask. If you have any kids with specific needs that you want to ask about, or if you want to know more about different conditions, if I can help, I will. Like if you've got a child with dyscalculia and you want to know more about it, anything like that, please do ask. I'm here if you need.